This is Miami, where the sun shines brighter than a disco ball at midnight and the humidity is like hugging a wet sponge, where pastel suits were made fashionable and alligators considered part of the landscape. The faux glamour played host to the Formula One circus this weekend and provided a thriller that we'll be talking about for many years to come. In this edition of F1 Brake Check, we're going to talk about the brief history of the Miami Grand Prix. We'll have a part 4 of our 3-part series on F1 power units. Corey will twist up my brain again in our Stump the Pundit segment, and we will break down all of the news, rumors, and exciting action from this weekend. So grab a Cuban sandwich and a cigar, settle in with your favorite coffee, and get ready. F1 Brake Check is coming at you.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, it's history time, folks. For nearly 40 years, the city of Miami held the ambition of hosting a Formula One Grand Prix. Ralph Sanchez, a Miami racing driver in his own right and a promoter, attempted to lure Bernie Ecclestone to Miami with a proposal for a street circuit that would wind through Bayfront Park in central Miami. Failing to get a deal done, Sanchez staged races for IMSA and later IndyCar throughout the 80s, 90s, and the early aughts until 2010, switching between Bayfront, Bicentennial Park, Tamiami Park, and the Homestead Oval. After a couple of false starts, in 2020, a proposal was made to F1 that would see a race staged at the Hard Rock Stadium, home of the NFL Miami Dolphins, in 2021. The circuit was built as a permanent layout with some of the infrastructure being removed when races were not actively taking place. The course was designed in such a way as to minimize the impact to the local residents during race weekend. A 10-year contract was agreed upon, and the inaugural race was held in 2020 as planned, making it the first time the U.S. had hosted 2 Grand Prix since 1982. The circuit features some very nice high-speed straights with a good mix of high and low-speed corners that provide a technical challenge for the drivers. The circuit was resurfaced before the 2024 event with a hopes of increasing the grip levels and make the racing more exciting. One of Miami's most notable, and some say controversial, features is the faux marina that contains a number of yachts surrounded by quote-unquote water that consist of tarps painted to look like water. This was intended initially to prove a level of glamour to mimic Monaco and the yachts that docked during the race weekend on the edge of the track. After the first year, though, the promoters stopped looking at it as a glamour position and more as a novelty and leaned into not taking themselves too seriously. Last time in our Tech Corner, we discussed the current iteration of power units that drive the Formula One field. Today, in part 4 of our 3-part series, we will discuss the proposed new rules that will govern the power units starting in 2026. First up, it needs to be noted that the sporting regulations that will govern the 2026 have been ratified, but the finer points are still being made. The FIA and the constructors are still hammering out the final details, but this has not stopped the manufacturers from starting work and testing and developing their offerings. The framework of the rules were introduced a couple of years ago, and the manufacturers have used the framework as their blueprint to try and get a jump on the work needed to be done. Let's start the discussion on what isn't changing. In 2026, the heart of the power unit will still be a turbocharged 1.6-liter V6 internal combustion engine. Additionally, the size of the power storage unit, i.e. the battery, will remain the same specification concerning weight and capacity. The other components will be where the majority of the changes will come from. The first change will be to the MGU-H. If you don't remember from part 3, the MGU-H is a device that was mated to the turbocharger and used the excess heat to generate electricity that was then used to drive a motor that kept the turbo spinning. In 2026, the MGU-H will be dropped from the power units. The MGU-H is a component that is not widely used in road cars, and the development of the system never really proved beneficial to the manufacturers. The cost of developing the system, which had very little real-world application, was seen as a barrier to other manufacturers who wish to join the sport. The loss of the MGU-H will result in more turbo lag, or the time it takes for the turbo to spin up and begin producing its extra power. But other changes in the regulation are being made to combat this issue. More on this later. Next up, the cars will have to run on fully sustainable fuels. What does this mean? All of the fuel suppliers will now have to create fuels that are generated from non-petroleum sources. These can be non-food grade waste or from direct carbon capture from the atmosphere. The fuels will all be drop-in solutions, meaning that they could go into and power an existing internal combustion engine with no changes needed to the engines or to the delivery system infrastructure of fueling stations. We will discuss the changes to the fuel in greater depth in a future Tech Corner. With a switch to the sustainable fuels, the amount of fuel that will be delivered to the ice will be cut from the current 100 kilograms per hour at 10,500 RPMs to 70 kilograms per hour, a reduction of 30% over the current regulations. This will also have the initial knock-on effect of reducing the power of the current ice to around 550 horsepower. But with F1 engineers being as clever as they are, expect the number to climb as they attempt to claw back more and more power. With the death of the MGUH, the other power generator, the MGUK, or kinetic energy system, will have a much more significant role in the power unit. The KERS system has much more real-world application as they are used in a number of hybrid and EVs that are on the road today. The efficiencies and power gains that the engine manufacturers are able to obtain with the new system will greatly affect the cars on the road in the future. Previously, the KERS produced 120 kilowatts, or roughly 165 extra horsepower that could be deployed by the driver. For 2026, the KERS will now generate almost 3 times as much energy, up to a staggering 350 kilowatts, or roughly 469 horsepower. This means that the output of the power unit will be almost a 50-50 split between the ICE and the KERS system. One of the concerns currently among the drivers is that the new system, with its higher output while maintaining the same storage capacity, will reduce the amount of time the extra power can be deployed by the drivers. However, if that is indeed the case at the start of the 2026 season, don't expect those limitations to last long. All of the changes for 2026 will challenge the engineers of the manufacturers and the race teams. This should provide some very exciting developments, and time will tell how those changes will play out and who will have the advantage when the power units fire for the first time in 2026. All right, now it's time for your favorite game show, Stump the Pundit. Corey, what do you have for me this week?
In this week's Stump the Pundit, I thought about how we've done certain aspects of drivers, mostly around number of wins, pole positions, and things like that. So I was thinking, why not actually, how much do we actually know these drivers? This week, I was focusing on Lando Norris. True or false? Lando owns a karting team.
True.
What's the name?
That I don't know.
It's LN Racing.
LN Racing. Okay. Yeah. Sounds appropriate. Yes.
So growing up, Lando wasn't always an F1 fan. I mean, always an F1 fan, but he also liked other sporting series as well. Knowing that, who was his idol growing up?
That's a good one. I have absolutely no idea. I know that he was a big fan of Lewis coming up in Vettel, but non-Formula One, I have no idea.
It's Valentino Rossi. For those that are into MotoGP, he is basically comparable to Michael Schumacher.
Yeah.
In MotoGP. So that was him. And in fact, it actually spawned him wanting to become number 4, because that's the first digit of Rossi's number, which is 4. Yeah,
that's interesting.
True or false? Lando is a musician.
I want to say that's true. I want to say he plays drums, but I'm not 100% sure.
So yeah, he does actually play drums, but he also plays guitar and piano.
Oh wow,
he's been
a Renaissance man.
Right, exactly. Do you know what his nickname is?
No, I don't.
Last Lap Lando.
Last Lap Lando.
That's because he has distinction of pulling off wins coming from behind.
So yeah, coming from the on the very last lap.
Exactly.
I did not know that, but that's very apropos, and I'm going to remember that one for in the future.
All right, and that's it. That's it for Stump the Pundit.
All right. Cool. All right. So I think it's time for our news and breakdown from the action from this weekend at Miami. First thing is we got to talk about the news that came out before the weekend started. And it's the news that heard around the world that Adrian Newey, ace designer of 13 drivers championship winning cars, 12 constructors winning championship cars, is leaving Red Bull in Q1 of 2025. This has sent a huge ripple throughout the Formula One paddock, with everyone speculating on where he's going, what he's going to do, and what this is going to mean for Red Bull, and also with whatever team that he lands with next year. So, Corey, your thoughts, go.
It's not an exciting time to be at Red Bull right now.
And we will talk about that next.
Yeah. So as we talked about before, Red Bull is going to be their own downfall. With
And you
Newey
hit
leaving,
that right on the head.
yeah, with Newey leaving, I mean that's one, and he is the de facto best designer out there, and for somebody else to come out behind him, it's going to take them a few years. So I predict the next few years, Red Bull is going to have some tough times. It doesn't matter who drives for them. It's going to be a tough few years. It's an exciting time, definitely, to see where he goes. The big speculation, the big money is on Ferrari. So we all think that he's going there. It'd be great to see him and Lewis partner up again and see what they can do. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think that this is definitely not completely shocking news. We had talked about this several times already this season when the rumor was floating around, but it was still unofficial that Newey was going anywhere.
Right.
The fact that it happened and that it happened this early in the season was kind of the shocking part of it. The one thing I do disagree with you on it, though, is I think that next year Red Bull will still do fairly well. The car will still going to be very well developed underneath the current rule set.
Yep.
Now, going from 2026 on, that's another thing.
Exactly. And as you're saying, 2026, that's right when we get Audi back into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be a very competitive time, especially like you said, for Red Bull. 2026 may not be the opportune time to be driving there.
Yeah, absolutely. Speculation has it that Freddie over at Ferrari was able to lure Newey. Ferrari has tried several times to lure Newey to come to work for them. Newey has expressed that it would leave a very small hole in his resume not having worked for the most famous and longest tenured F1 team on the grid. He's also mentioned how much he would love to work with Lewis.
Yep.
How great it would be to take and go out at the end of his career to win one more championship, not counting this year and possibly next year, but the very last car was a championship winning car for Ferrari and got Lewis his 8th driver's championship. I mean, how cool would that be? But the thing that I'm going to say is that I still think that Aston Martin, because Lawrence Stroll has backed the truck up to try to get him. And actually, I forgot about Newey had actually worked with Aston Martin to develop the Valkyrie track car. Yeah, I'd completely forgotten that he had helped develop the aerodynamics for that particular car. For those of you who don't know, Aston Martin produced a track-only like supercar called the Valkyrie that just produced just absolutely just mind-boggling performance numbers. And he had a big hand in developing that car. So he has those links at Aston Martin. The team principal at Aston Martin asked several times this weekend about Newey coming, and he got very curt with the answers, which kind of leads one to believe that they really tried to get him, and he has basically told them no, that it's not happening. I don't think he's going to Aston Martin. I saw one other thing that was very interesting, that Newey is actually going to go to Audi. New car, new engine, that maybe Audi has been able to lure him away from Red Bull for the new challenge of developing a completely clean slate car for Audi's entry into competition in 2026. So I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. My money's still that he's going to Ferrari.
But that is interesting because that's right when they're entering F1 is right when he's going to be able to start working again on new cars. So I didn't think about that one. That's very interesting.
The one other thing that I saw, though, that I thought was kind of interesting, but I don't see it happening, is Chris Medlin, who is a phenomenal journalist. He's a special correspondent for F1. And he had a very interesting take on that. They had asked a number of journalists where they thought Newey would go next. And Chris Medlin actually said he thought that it would be very interesting if Newey went back to Williams so that his career basically went full circle. He lifted Williams from midfield competitor to the sharp end of the grid and won several championships with him. Maybe he can work the same magic and lift Williams out of the doldrums that they're in and bring them back to the forefront of Formula One. I think Newey would relish the challenge of getting to bring his former team back to the sharp end of the grid. But the problem is, though, is that in order to do that, they would need such a massive upgrade in facilities and infrastructure to put them on par with the other front runners like Red Bull and Aston Martin and Ferrari. They're not going to be able to do that in a year and a half. And so I really don't see that being a viable option for Newey. So with Newey leaving, that brings up the next item on our rundown is, are we starting to see the cracks at Red Bull? So like you mentioned at one of the early podcasts for this season, you said that the only people that could beat Red Bull right now is Red Bull. I just wanted to see your thoughts on, are we actually seeing that? Is that's what's actually starting to come to bear, and that Red Bull is starting to crack and Newey is just the first domino to fall?
My speculation is Red Bull will come back, but I think this is the beginning. We've all been there. We've given our notice. Soon as we give our notice, what happens? Our performance drops. No matter what, you're the best worker in the world. It doesn't matter. Mentally, you've checked out. Mentally, Newey has checked out. Yeah, exactly. So, in fact, he's not able to see any of the new designs moving forward. So they're already starting to siphon his access off and see what the other designers can pick up. So from a design standpoint, yeah, definitely. We're starting to see some of those weaknesses there. This definitely opens the door because we've talked about it. Frederick Vasseur has been taking a lot of talent from Red Bull. Newey possibly could be oh man. So to answer your question, I definitely believe that he's part of the reason why we're starting to see some cracks in Red Bull. What say you?
Well, I agree that yes, we are definitely seeing some cracks because I forget who it was, but I saw an article earlier this week that mentioned that as soon as Newey announced that he was leaving Red Bull, I think it was Zach, actually. I think it was Zach Brown actually mentioned that the minute that Newey had notified Red Bull that he was leaving, that all of a sudden that McLaren and the other teams started getting a flood of resumes being sent to them by current Red Bull employees. Now, how much of that's true or not, I don't know that we'll ever know, but it's one of those things that, yes, when you have someone who has very much been a leader of the team for almost 20 years, almost 2 decades, when he leaves, there's a lot of people that may follow suit. All right, so we've got the pre-race news out of the way. So now we got to take and jump into what I feel is the most amazing thing from the Miami weekend, and that is the win by Lando Norris, bringing his McLaren home in P1 in the race. Not only did he drive an absolutely picture-perfect race, but he had the measure of Max. I saw it in a couple places where they were like, well, he was able to hold off Max. And it's like, no, he was running away from Max.
Yeah.
It was like he was picking up half a second, a quarter to a half a second per lap over Max. We can no longer call him Lando No Win anymore. It's like Lando had been listening to our podcast, because even just 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Chinese Grand Prix afterwards, I had said, and I had reiterated something that I said at the very beginning of the season, that for Lando, it was not a matter of if he was ever going to win a Grand Prix. It was just a matter of when. And I said that I guarantee you that it was going to be this season. And here I am.
Yep, exactly.
I was right.
Right.
And I am so happy. I am so excited for Lando to finally get that. And just the sheer look of joy on his face when he was standing on the podium, overjoyed in the fact that he finally won his first Grand Prix, did it in such a outstanding and convincing manner. It wasn't something that was gifted to him. Now, some people might say that the late safety car, he was able to judge the restart perfectly. First happened, I thought, oh no, are we going to have another ones where he might be able to hold Max off for 2 or 3 laps, but then Max is going to get around him and he's going to check out. And no, it was the exact opposite. Lando judged the start perfectly. Max challenged him for the first maybe 2-3 corners, and then Lando was just gone. So just an all-around outstanding victory for Lando Norris, finally getting that first Grand Prix win. So I've talked long enough. You go.
It's one of those wins, honestly, that even if you're not a Norris fan, if you're just an F1 fan, you relished in this win. This race was so important just for the sport itself. There's pictures of Fred Vasseur in the camp with the McLaren team, drinking it up and having a good time, wearing their gear. So this was not just a win. I mean, obviously this is a great win for Norris, but everybody went up to him, congratulated him. Max went over, said, congratulations, Lewis. I mean, you go down the paddock, everybody was ecstatic that he won. And just on the telecast, just like you said, he didn't win because of some fluke. He didn't win because it was raining or because there was a DNF or anything like that. He won legitimate, his own car, his own strategy, and him being the driver in that car. That's what won this race.
But one of the other things, too, that I thought was absolutely the best moment of the whole weekend is after, he had climbed out of the car, he had gotten his mandatory weigh-in. When he saw his team and he set his helmet and Hans device down on the ground, probably 20 yards from the team, and took a full running sprint. And what I'm going to now call it the Lando leap, after much like the Lambeau leap that they do at for the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field in Wisconsin. It's now the Lando leap, where he leapt in over the barrier into the arms of his team, and they lifted him up. I thought that was just one of the best moments of the whole weekend, along with the moment that you mentioned about how Vasseur grabbed his own bottle of champagne, made his way over to where the team was taking their victory photo, and then afterwards celebrated with him. This was just such a popular win. He is a phenomenal driver, and not only that, but he's also just a phenomenal person.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's the reason why I think you saw just such adulation from everyone up and down the paddock who were so excited to see him get this first win. And I think it's going to be the first of many wins to come.
Oh yeah, you mentioned those 2 favorite spots, when Lando was doing the dive and everything like that. The other one was when he and Zach Brown met.
Oh,
you
yes.
See, brother, stop. You stayed with me. You could just see that electricity just between them, and I got your back. I have your back. It was a beautiful moment. Just no words had to be said. You knew what both of them were thinking. It was awesome.
This weekend was the culmination of the last few months with Lando and McLaren, is the fact that Lando put his full faith in McLaren by signing a long-term extension to his contract, and McLaren returned that in kind by putting their full faith in Lando and giving him a massively impressive car this weekend. He was fast right out of the container. Oscar also running a very, very good race until he had his unfortunate incident that broke his front wing during the main race. That's the other thing too, though, that we got to remember is that after the sprint, we haven't even talked about the sprint. After the sprint, Lando gets punted off at the first corner. But then come Sunday, everything went his way. For a driver as young as Oscar is, he could have gotten very frustrated by the whole incident happening, his wing getting broken, him having to come in, him having to drop back in the field during the race. And for him to come in, get his front wing changed, and then he ends up going from dead last all the way back up to 13th and just almost in the points, just goes to show just what a great weekend that McLaren had. Even though they had a few incidents that were completely out of their control, they held their cool and they executed everything about as best as you could expect for what they got dealt. And they took and chomped onto every opportunity that they had this weekend. All right, so we've talked about the race winner. So let's talk about the pole sitter for both the race and the sprint, and the sprint winner in Max Verstappen. So it looked like it was going to be just another dominating weekend for Max. Had a really great run during the sprint race and everything, but we got to talk about his comedy act. So during the Grand Prix, Max took out one of the cones that they were using to mark the apex of one of the turns. And when asked about it, Max basically said, I didn't like it being there. Thought it was useless, so I took it out. And so I think all the other drivers agreed with me that it was good. Your thoughts?
Oh, it's hilarious. That's Max being Max.
Yes.
So funny that he can laugh at himself. On the opposite side, we had Lewis complaining that it was gone.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, I said that Lewis was one of the few that complained about it. Now, whether he just truly wanted it there, or whether he knew that Max had taken it out and it was just kind of, if somebody else had taken it out, would he have complained as much as he did? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that.
Sure.
I thought that his comments after the race were just about Lando winning, and about how when he agreed that Lando he had the measure of everybody that weekend, and he was so gracious. Max is the kind of guy who he does not like to finish second. Right. But I guess if there's a handful of people on the grid that if he's going to finish second too, he doesn't mind as much. He still minds, don't get me wrong, because he's such a fierce competitor, but I don't think he's going to mind as much.
Right, exactly. Well, plus they're friends too, so that always helps.
So we got to talk about the third place finisher for the Grand Prix, and I believe he came in second for the sprint race as well. So Charles Leclerc had a really great weekend. Ferrari just in general had a really, really good weekend. They continue to impress. They have taken huge chunks out of Red Bull's performance. I think that they are another one of those teams that they're going to continue to work, and they're going to continue to being able to regularly challenge Red Bull as the season progresses. We can talk about Ferrari's performance, and we can also talk about, again, just what a phenomenal job Freddie has done over there at Ferrari since joining. Your thoughts on Ferrari's weekend?
Like what we said from the very beginning of this year, he's just knocking it down. He's knocking time down, and the difference between him and Red Bull, it's no longer a question. Ferrari is right there. He's got their strategies right. The car's looking good. The drivers have been good from day one. It's absolutely fun to see these three teams, really, Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari now really joining this three-way fight. It's going to be very interesting for the rest of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. With that being said, though, then we have to talk about the next item, which is Mercedes continues to slide backwards, and it makes you, if you're a Mercedes fan or even a Mercedes mechanic or someone who works for Mercedes, makes you very nervous about the rest of the season, whereas McLaren and Ferrari are taking that step forward. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's just one of those things that Toto or what, but they're continuing to slide back. Their upgrades haven't really made much of a difference. And it's not the drivers. They have great drivers, so it's not that. It's their strategies seem to be fairly good. It's just the car just is not that fast. Lewis took a few laps to just pass a Haas. I mean, really?
Yeah.
Haas? It took you that long? And again, I'm not disparaging Lewis because Lewis is a great driver. I'm more disparaging the car itself. It's not there.
Couldn't agree with you more. The only thing that I can see is that talked about the number of other teams that are getting flooded by talent from Red Bull, that if the right personnel leave Red Bull and go over to Mercedes, I think that's the only way that it could entice Max away from Red Bull. Or if, more of the internal struggles and controversies at the management level, if those continue to get worse, I can see Max even being willing to take a not as good a car just simply to get away. I still think that some of the other drivers who are looking for a ride for next year, Carlos Sainz, either one of the Sauber drivers, Any of those could, maybe Albon, that if offered that empty seat at Mercedes, they're still going to take it, because with all of the resources that Mercedes has, and we've talked about this before, that right now I think they've kind of gone in the wrong direction and they've paid the price for it. But the thing is, though, is that this is Mercedes. They have all the resources in the world. They are going to right the ship at some point. Now, whether it's going to be this season or next season, or maybe it might even be 2026. All right, so let's move on to Racing Bulls. So we had talked about this, that 2 weeks ago in China, it was an absolutely disastrous weekend for Yuki.
Yeah.
And we both commented that how we thought that Yuki was just going to need to, the entire weekend basically just needed to be thrown in the bin, that he just wanted to get the heck out of China and move on to Miami. And he delivered. The first 3 races of the year, he was into Q3 in all those races, and then had the disastrous weekend at China. And then he returned to form and got back into Q3 for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Now, his sprint qualifying wasn't great. For the sprint, he made it into Q2, but he didn't get to turn a lap in Q2, so that relegated him down to 15th, because I believe it was an electrical gremlin, if I remember correctly, that kept him out of being able to participate in Q2. But then on Sunday, made it into Q3, qualifies 10th, holds off a charging Lance Stroll during Q2, and then, albeit quiet, a very, very solid race on Sunday, brings it home in 7th. We definitely saw the bounce back from Yuki that we were expecting.
Yep, exactly.
It was an up and down weekend for Danny, but it's like at times he looked brilliant and at times he didn't. So it's one of those things where he's gone from being really bad all weekend to kind of an up and down weekend that makes you kind of think, well, maybe he's finally progressing in the right direction. And as I've talked about several times, that I still think the talent's there. I still think that the desire is there. It's just the mental part of it, I think, is what's getting in Danny's way. For the sprint race, he had an absolutely brilliant qualifying for the sprint. Came in 4th, drove a very solid sprint race and brought it home in the same position. So points paying position. The sprint on Saturday for Danny was awesome. And then we got to qualifying for the race. He winds up in 18th.
Yeah.
But then he has a decent race, gains a couple places, comes home in 15th. He didn't have a great Grand Prix, but he had a fantastic sprint. It's been very up and down. Your thoughts?
I am a fan of Danny's. When I talk poorly about him, it's not him, it's his performance, because I like him and I really want him to do well. But you know, with a sprint race, I just see that as being one of those fluke things that he does where he's fantastic. And like you said, you can see the brilliance there. And then the next day, I mean, literally the next day, he's back to form. He's back in 15th to 18th place. And that's where he was at McLaren. It's really a difficult time to be in the Racing Bulls management, because you have this driver that you can see brilliance in, but he's just not delivering it day in, day out. Unlike Yuki, in the same car, you have another driver that is doing a phenomenal job.
Let's take and talk about Williams and particularly Logan this weekend. Logan had a very, very solid weekend.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by how well Logan was performing this weekend. He didn't have the greatest sprint qualifying, but for the first time ever, Logan out-qualified his teammate for the sprint race, and he had a fantastic sprint race in the fact that he came home in 10th place, which, if it had been a regular Grand Prix, would have been a points-paying position. Unfortunately, being a sprint, that's still 2 positions out of points paying. And the fact that he finished 3 positions ahead of his very, very highly touted teammate on the sprint weekend. So this was the first time this year that Logan has not qualified at the bottom of the speed charts for either a sprint or a Grand Prix. This is the first time that he's out-qualified his teammate. He had a really great sprint race, and then he had a really good run going on Sunday until K-Mag punted him off the course and sent him into the tire barrier.
There's a remarkable improvement in his drive, most definitely.
I definitely agree. We talked about it during the preview show last week that we both thought that Alpine was not going to look very good this weekend. Now, having said that, though, kind of proved us wrong. And it makes me kind of wonder, again, you can't judge everything on one race. So we'll have to see how they do in 2 weeks at Imola. But for the first time this season, both Alpines qualified, both made it through to Q2. They didn't have a great race. Ocon came in 10th, got a much needed point for Alpine during the race. They both looked very, very racy during the race. At one point, I mean, they were fighting each other. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. It's going to be another Melbourne all over again, where they're going to end up putting each other into the wall and stuff. But they didn't put each other into the wall. We didn't think that Alpine was going to be able to do much this year because they had gone in such the wrong direction. But I think that we're starting to see that maybe Alpine's starting to right the ship.
These last upgrades look really good on Alpine. So I think you're right. I think they're starting to right that ship, and it's starting to look good again for them. I mean, they both look very competitive. They both look like just really great drives out there, and they beat 20th and 19th. So
yes, absolutely. Aston Martin had kind of an okay weekend. There's still some scuttlebutt between Ricciardo and Stroll, because Stroll hasn't really apologized for taking Danny Rick out during the race in China, which I think is just, it's a lot to do about nothing. So I really not that big of a deal. Stroll had an okay weekend. Fernando had an okay weekend. Haas had a really good weekend going until K-Mag and Logan had their little kerfuffle. Nico had a really, really good drive. At one point was up in the points. Unfortunately, he ended up finishing 11th during the Grand Prix. He did get a couple points during sprint, though, because he did finish 7th. They had a kind of an okay weekend. Sauber, again, had a pretty much a miserable weekend for the most part.
I like K-Mag as a driver. I think he's great, but what's gotten into him the last few weeks, it's just been like he's not driving like a professional. He's getting tons of penalties, which honestly, I rarely say this about the FIA, but they're actually deserved.
Yeah.
You know, so
and he's really close to a suspension now.
And he should be.
One race suspension.
The way he's driving, he should be.
Hulkenberg has signed with Sauber. How much is it he's trying too hard to prove himself in order to have a race seat for next season? Because we know that Magnussen wants to stay in Formula One. He's pushing too hard, which is causing him to make mistakes.
Well, we saw the same thing with Perez last year. The exact same thing. Perez was not driving like Perez. K-Mag is not driving like, well, to be fair, he does put out his elbows, but he doesn't drive dirty like this. This is very uncharacteristic of him.
Yeah, no, completely agree. This just the last couple of weeks have just been very uncharacteristic of K-Mag. And I'm hoping that maybe now that he's going to have that, I don't want to see him drive timid so much, but I'm hoping that maybe it might change his mindset a little bit and make him refocus a little bit. Maybe this 2-week break before Imola might be just what he needs. All right, so you think we should bring it home?
I think we're ready.
Okay. Like a winning F1 driver after invading the wildest nightclub, it's time for us to call it a night. Join us next week when Corey and I will get you ready for the San Marino Grand Prix at the fantastic Imola circuit. We'll once again play Stump the Pundit, and we'll have a new history lesson on some of the characters from Formula One, past and present. So until next time, kiddies, he's Corey, I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.